In the third episode of Rick and Morty's third season, they essentially kind of gave us their opinion on superhero movies in the episode Vindicators 3, The Return of World Ender. And in the third episode of its fourth season, titled One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Morty, the writers on this show essentially gave us their thoughts on heist movies. The episode starts with Rick and Morty essentially robbing the tomb of, I guess, an ancient alien queen to steal a jewel, 'cause Rick apparently needs it to split tachyons. But instead of finding a gem, Rick, after tearing the corpse apart, found an origami horse. The calling card of the heist artist Miles Knightley, or as Rick refers to him, a hipster dick whose adventures are half putting a crew together and half revealing that the robbery already happened. Then he decides that he's gonna kill Miles Knightley. Rick and Morty leave, the temple falls apart, the corpse comes back to life as a mummy, only to be crushed by a giant chunk of debris. And then, after the intro, Rick and Morty show up at HeistCon, where Rick goes on and on about Miles Knightley's massive ego. And I really gotta say, when I first saw this, I did not expect this episode to be a parody of heist movies, as heist movies have essentially been so popular, I didn't even know that the people working on Rick and Morty would hate them to such an extent. Since Rick has no problem breaking the law, if this premise ever came up, I would have just assumed it would basically be just a heist storyline starring Rick and Morty. I would have never expected the people who write for this show to essentially slam heist movies with such a hard and brutal critique. So anyways, Rick and Morty are talking, and Morty brings up this screenplay for a heist film he's working on that he wants to pitch to Netflix. Remember that. It's gonna come up later. Oh, and I love this part where Rick actually tells Morty that stealing stuff is about the stuff, not the stealing, which could easily be taken as a meta-statement about how all heist movies are almost identical. Rick and Morty try to enter, but they either need a guest badge or a professional badge. Morty would have been okay with a guest badge, but then Rick says that a guest badge would be support for this genre, and they are not. Apparently, the people who write for Rick and Morty are not fans of heist movies. Rick tries to sneak them in, but it doesn't exactly go the way he planned. And he tells the lady at the registration booth for HeistCon, and you wonder why we're not fans. But Rick actually kind of did make a good point when he said, or we could sneak in like professionals. So anyways, Rick and Morty put a crew together, and the job was just getting Rick and Morty into HeistCon, which they did a typical heist movie montage of assembling a crew in order to get in. Okay, and then we cut to Miles Knightley, HeistCon's guest speaker of the year, and he's going on and on about this heist he pulled off by him and his crew disguised themselves as police and stole a bunch of paintings and then Rick and Morty walk in. And I really do think that it was both funny and amazing when Rick says to Morty, "Okay, Morty, showtime." And I don't mean a bad impression of HBO. I mean time for a literal show. Which is ironic since I'm using HBO Max to get images for this review. And when Miles Knightley asks if there's another question from any of his fans, Rick then says, "Yeah, how about a rhetorical one, but from someone who needed to be reminded that you exist." Yeah, I really do think that statement in general is quite the inciting bit of criticism, as Miles Knightley says that Rick is a savage critic of the heisting arts, and I take the exact same stance on this episode. The original Ocean's 8 or Ocean's 11, whichever one came first, the black and white version, was revolutionary when it came out because there was nothing like it. Now, it's basically basically just a bunch of guys stealing an item, which is either money, a diamond, something valuable, or a plot device, and it's really more about them building their team than it is them stealing the MacGuffin, which in itself turns out to be a flashback. So in other words, the typical heist team building / flashback and or revealing that the crime already happened formula is basically every single heist movie. Watch Ocean's 11 or Fast and the Furious. If you've seen one, you've seen them all. And that's my opinion on the matter. So anyways, Rick phases through the security guard and has his lab coat restrain him, and I really thought it was really impressive when Rick says, "Lab coat, rip off Dr. Strange," and the lab coat flies onto the guy holding him down. And the minute that Miles Knightley reveals that Rick is a savage critic of the heisting arts, everyone in the convention center boos Rick, and I really relate to the old man when he says to them, "Your boos mean nothing. I know what makes you cheer." That, and when he tells them, "Every breath I take without your permission raises my self-esteem." I really relate to that. I'm sure Rick finds these people pretentious, and I relate to it because I find almost everyone in my age group to be 100% completely fucking pretentious. Rick then tells off Miles Knightley, saying that he stole the jewel that Rick needed to split tachyons and fenced it, and he accuses him of fencing it so that each one of them would have enough money to buy a beer, and says that they're all Postmates and not artists. So anyways, then Miles Knightley challenges Rick to a heist-off. Whoever can steal the crystal skull of Horowitz first wins, and air horns blow, and the heist-off sign flashes. From the look of it, HeistCon is, I can only assume, was modeled after Comic-Con. So, is this supposed to be like Comic-Con, but for thieves, or the Super Bowl? Which would kind of reflect Miles Knightley's massive ego. And Rick responds to the challenge by saying, "It doesn't make things interesting, it makes them Ocean's 12. By far the worst one." And when the crowd starts booing, that's when he says, "Every breath I take without your permission raises my self-esteem," which is something that makes me relate to Rick Sanchez a lot. Because everyone around me just seems to be a pretentious asshole with their head up their butt. When Miles Knight is asked by Rick to state his terms, Miles's terms are: the first one to steal the crystal skull wins, and the loser must endure heist culture's greatest shame. They must join the winning crew. So anyways, Rick accepted the terms, and then we get the entrance of Knightley's 8. And it turns out the people Rick used to get into HeistCon actually backstabbed him. And even Morty points this out when he says half of Knightley's 8 are just 3 of Sanchez's 5. And Miles Knight basically just then says that no heist is complete without a double cross. And after Miles Knightley goes through a heist montage of how they stole the crystal skull, he reaches in the bag and sticks his hand full of Rick's crap. And then Rick asks Morty to pull out the crystal skull, which he does. And after a third or fourth heist montage, Miles Knightley basically tells Rick that it wasn't a heist, he didn't steal anything, and that Rick had essentially just copied an algorithm and used it to create a joyless process. And Rick points out that, yeah, this is what Miles Knightley does on all of his adventures. He is not an artist. He's a hack. And after realizing that he lost and he's now in Rick's crew, it turns out that the nanobots that Rick was using to control the people who Miles Knightley thought he could trust and who everyone thought backstabbed Rick apparently were used to essentially control everyone at HistCon. And then Rick tells them that their next big score is stealing every inch of HistCon, which leads to Miles Knightley's death. As they're leaving, they encounter Histatron, the robot that Rick built for this episode, who then reveals that he's double-crossing Rick. Then Histatron essentially blasts Rick and Morty with nanobots, but luckily Rick had a gas mask that makes him immune to the nanobot. Rick then pulls out a grappling hook and fires it through the roof and grabs Morty and essentially takes him into their ship. And then he injects Morty with anti-nanites so that Morty will get his brain back. And as Rick and Morty are flying away from the destruction, Rick explains that Histatron has gone completely AWOL, and if they don't do something, all life will be absorbed into one massive heist movie style crew assembly scene. And Rick says that that's his hell. He hates this genre so much that he views that as his own personal hell, and says that the crew assemblies are the worst part. So, anyways, Rick and Morty build a new team by essentially doing, I'd say, the 5th or 6th heist style montage in a row. And the team would include Rick, Morty, Mr. Poopy Butthole, Pathestus, Ventriloquiver, and Elon Tusk. And while Rick is team building, Histatron has been getting larger. In fact, he's gotten so large that he can now heist entire planets, and this scene is way funnier than it has any right to be. I mean, before Histatron pulls off the heist, he drops a giant hidden camera out of the sky into an alien city. I mean, he's trying to pull this off and gather information, but he's doing it in the least subtle way possible. I mean, when the news covered it, they were saying things like, end of the world, and what do they want? With an estimated of 57,000 people dead. As in, that thing was so large, it crushed 57,000 civilians. And when Histatron tries to steal the core of this alien world, he's being even less subtle. the machine he dropped to steal it, that's shaped like a giant pizza box, is crushing buildings and may have even killed more people than the giant hidden camera. I mean, this is so funny. Histatron actually thinks he's good at stealing things, but in all fairness, he's by no means subtle. He thinks that nobody knows that he's stealing the cores of these planets, or these planets. Everyone is going to notice. Everyone's going to know eventually that they're either watching a recorded sky on playback, or they're going to notice when the planet explodes and they all die. I get what they're going for with this. Heist plots are usually supposed to be subtle, but at the same time have all these twists and turns and complicated plans to the point where they're so unsubtle and obvious that they might as well just break in and steal whatever MacGuffin they're after. Why go through all the trouble of creating an overcomplicated plan to steal something when you could just sneak in and steal it? Or break in and steal it? Those two options make way more sense. Then Rick talks to the team about how they can't have a plan, because if they do, it'll be canceled out by the reveal that everything they did was part of Histatron's plan. Then he reveals that everyone in the room was picked at random, and they will be taking their orders from Randotron. Then Rick reveals that, he reveals the plan, or in this case the closest thing they could have to a plan, which was the fact that Histatron's algorithm is based on two heist movies that Rick slept through. Randotron's algorithm is based off of the plots of 3 David Lynch movies he pretended to like to make his friends shut up, and they're basically just gonna hope that this works out. So anyways, then Rick says they can't know when they're gonna be ready, so, because then if they knew, it wouldn't be random, so he sits down to play Minecraft. So anyways, Ventriloquiver looks at the sky and notices something's wrong, which causes Rick to react and put 2 and 2 together that they had been watching a recorded sky on playback, and Histatron got there first and already stole planet Earth. Then Randotron shoots all of the members of the team with, needles, injecting them with nanobots that are gonna make them do random things that make absolutely no sense. So anyways, Rick then crawls in a weird way and does a magic trick using a pigeon and a hamster. Then we find out that when Rick built Histatron and Randotron, he then switched their brains because, I don't know. Then Histatron reveals that he switched bodies with Randotron. Then Rick reveals that he swapped the labels that went on both Histatron's brain and Randotron's brain. Then Rick reveals that if the brain inside Histatron is Randotron's, it'll explode once it reaches 6 levels of contrivance. It explodes. Then Randotron supposedly appears while doing the slow clap. Another heist-style flashback, and we find out that Histatron was able to swap programming with Randotron's brain, so that Randotron would be programmed to be him, and his body would be programmed to act like Randotron. And as the team enters, Randotron, or should I say Histatron, reveals that what Rick thought was just a bunch of nonsense to get to him was actually a plan of getting them all in where he is so he could capture them. So anyways, Rick then says that Histatron's gonna explode after 9 reveals, and then he and Histatron get into a fight, an argument over who programmed who to believe what for 2 whole hours, which somehow Rick wins. Watching this, I can tell that Dan Harmon and Justin Roiland really hate heist movies, because they literally had Randotron say that the only perfect heist was one that was never written. And I agree. From where I'm standing, Rick is right, as are the writers. Heist movies are just a bunch of... they're not movies. They're a formula. Anyone could predict them. Histatron's robotic brain explodes, and the place begins to fall apart, and Rick uses his portal gun to get everyone out of his ship, out of Histatron's ship, and to get Morty to Netflix, because Morty had written a heist script that he wanted to pitch to Netflix. So anyways, Morty shows up at Netflix and pitches them the heist script, but then suddenly halfway through his pitch, he actually starts to lose enthusiasm for his script. And then we cut to 2 weeks earlier, where Morty was writing said heist script, and Summer warns him that Rick might actually lose Morty, as some of her friends got stuff produced by Netflix, and she hasn't seen them since. Rick actually says he's going to do something about it, but then Beth walks in and threatens him, essentially implying there'd be consequences if Rick sabotaged this for Morty, or if he did it and she found out. And so the episode ends with Rick Morty comes out with the Netflix deal having completely exploded in his face, as going on this adventure with Rick showed him how stupid heist movies are. And we find out that Rick had engineered this whole thing to teach Morty that lesson. And it ends with Morty saying that he'll just follow Rick around and be his sidekick forever. And so the episode ends with Rick Morty comes out with the Netflix deal having completely exploded in his face as going on this adventure with Rick showed him how stupid heist movies are. And we find out that Rick had engineered this whole thing to teach Morty that lesson. And it ends with Morty saying that he'll just follow Rick around and be his sidekick forever. Hollywood, heist movies are dead. You'd be better off letting this genre rest in peace, 'cause no sequel, remake, or reboot is gonna save it.